So what will affect refrigerant availability and choice? Well, there are many factors out there, of course. By far the biggest one is legislation. F-gas legislation is certainly driving things. The phase down itself, the HFC phase down, but also the placing on the market prohibitions. This will really have the biggest effect on what refrigerants are available as we go into the future. REACH legislation, you may not be familiar with REACH legislation, you've probably heard of it more as the PFAS issue. The piece of legislation which controls that is called REACH, and we'll look at that in a moment to go into the details of that. And of course, standards. This is more choice than availability. Which refrigerant would you choose for which application? So these are the main things which are going to affect things as we go forward. So just very briefly on the REACH legislation, it regulates all chemicals. Anything which is sold in a quantity of more than a ton has to have a REACH registration. PFAS has been around for a long time. It's not new, but what's changed in 2021, the definition of what constitutes a PFAS changed. And that then included many of the molecules which are used as refrigerants. Incidentally, R32, 152A, R23, they're not PFAS. They're not affected by this, anything which happens with PFAS because they don't fit the definition, even though they've got pretty much the same properties as all the other refrigerant molecules. And of course, this doesn't just affect refrigeration systems. It also, it doesn't just affect the refrigerants in the system, it affects all refrigeration systems. There is no such thing as a PFAS-free refrigeration system. They all have PFAS in them somewhere, whether it be an elastomer or the refrigerant or other, or even in the lubricants sometimes, you find these things. So this is a big thing. If all PFASs are banned, then basically we don't have a refrigeration system, whatever the refrigerant we put in there. So it's really important that when this goes through, it's done in the right way. So how is this going forward? Well, the EU back in 2023 put forward basically a draft regulation that was put out for comment. Last year, the comments, over 5,600 comments came back, and they are being assessed by the European Chemicals Agency right this month. Actually, the HFCs and HFOs are being assessed, but the best information we've got suggests that there'll be no new legislation on this before 2029, and there seems to be a lot of softening of position in Europe. There's been a lot of political leaders saying that these products are actually, a lot of these products are actually essential, not the ones which are causing issues, but a lot of the ones which are not causing issues in the environment are necessary. In UK, of course, since Brexit, we don't have to follow what the EU is doing. The Environment Agency issued a report back in 2023, and they've recognised within that report that F-gases are heavily regulated. They're taking a risk-based approach, so they're looking at the highest risk products first. And HFCs, HFOs, and HCFOs have all been recognised as low risk, so they'll be well down the list of things which will be considered. There is no formal timetable for these assessments, but they're, like I said, they're working their way from the high risk to the low risk, and it's very likely that the F-gas legislation rather than REACH legislation is going to be the driving force on which refrigerants will be available as we go forward. F-gas, where are we with F-gas? So in Great Britain, again, we are not following the EU anymore. EU has a new F-gas regulation. We are still with the old one. So where are we with this? This is the current F-gas. This is the one we've been working with since 2015. You can see the step down with the HFCs and the end use placing on the market prohibitions, as they're called, the latest of which came into effect actually 1st of January this year. You probably remember all the publicity over the AC ban being extended to cellar cooling, which has now been suspended for now. Cellar cooling is not included. The AC ban did go ahead. UK has signed up to the Kigali Amendment, so this is already in place. This will happen when we get to 2034. There will be a further reduction in that. However, we have not, certainly as yet, followed the EU, which is, as you can see, a much more accelerated phase down. And in fact, for HFCs, it will become a phase out in 2050. This is, say, it's in the EU. This is not the current GB legislation. To achieve these levels, we will have to drop the average GWP of refrigerants used by considerably. We're currently probably around 1400 mark. We need to go to a much, much lower level. So will GB follow EU F-gas? This is a big question. And quite frankly, nobody knows for certain. The DEFRA, the department dealing with this, have certainly been very tight-lipped and not giving anything away. What we can do is look in to see if we can find any clues as to what's going on. So this is the current GB F-gas phase down. This is DEFRA looked at 3 scenarios in a report they published in 2022. This is what they call low ambition, which is essentially business as usual. This is if everybody jumped to the lowest possible GWP option they could immediately, irrelevant of cost and all the rest of it, then we should be able to achieve the current F-gas legislation. However, there is a third scenario. They looked at what they called challenging. Challenging essentially meant even if it's not actually practical or possible to do it today, if everyone was able to do it, this might be what we were able to achieve. We do have the Kigali Amendment, which obviously will take us lower. And if we do follow the commercially available line, then it's difficult will be difficult to achieve Kigali. We need to do more than we were able to do. This is based on the situation back in 2022. So we need to be able to do more than that to actually achieve that. And there have been comments attributed to some of the members of the DEFRA F-gas team saying that they saw Kigali as an ambitious phase down. So whether that's a clue or not, I don't know. It's anyone's guess. Where does the EU fit on all this? Well, here's the EU phase down. You can say it basically follows the challenging line which DEFRA put forward, and essentially they said they thought this was virtually impossible to achieve, but that's what the EU are trying to do.